Uh, this passage about not paying attention to some of the details
that set you off.
That set you off. It's very interesting. He's very also. I was just reflecting that he's talking also about those details that lead to ego, unskillful qualities, such as greed, distress. But maybe he doesn't want. He wants us to pay attention to details, like you were saying, to the details of aging, or at one point I was a retreatant, and there were people who were having meals in the evening, but I was not, and so I had to develop the ability to counter the sensual desire. I was actually the person who would take the compost and put it out, so I got a chance to see the food in the compost rotting, and so I had to pay attention to the details. So is that also...
yeah, whatever detail you find helps you get away from the details that would provoke greed and distress, that's fine. Okay. I waited tables in college, and they would always feed the waiting staff before the meal, because nobody was hungry after the end of the meal. Having to deal with all the things, serving the food, getting all the garbage back.
Right.
So when you're looking at what's left over, that's when you're eating food and you say, oh, well, this is good and that's good, and you ask, well, where is this going to be in 5 minutes, and where is it going to go eventually? And that helps make you realize, okay, I don't need to have all that extra stuff.
So would that mean that sensual desire is primarily because we erroneously pay attention to the details that attract us rather than to the other details, which are still right in front of us?
They're right in front of us, yeah. There's certain things we just can't block out. And that's how, and it's because the desire aggravates that. And this is one of the reasons why people are so opposed to, as I said last night, contemplating the body. They say, well, I'm going to be deprived of the satisfaction I get of seeing, looking for beauty in the body. But then you realize, okay, it's a pretty doomed exercise. Constantly trying to keep the body looking good, or trying to find good-looking bodies. I say it's really not worth it.
Yeah. A couple things. One is that I noticed that your translation seems to be a lot more pragmatic than the other translation I've read, which is to not grasp to signs and features. And so I was like, it seemed like oh, we're not supposed to see anything conceptually, or so, which seemed to me like, gosh, that's pretty advanced. So this is more just paying attention to what arises from when you focus on a particular aspect of an object. So that's helpful. The second is that, as you know, Ruby and I went on this long trip out to southern Utah, and one of for myself, the purposes of that trip, part of it was I was seeking delight in the sensual stimulus to the eye. And so...
Was it greed or distress?
No, that was a really good question. So we were talking about it.
Because that's one of the reasons why people go into nature, because, okay, here's a pleasure that doesn't excite as much greed or distress as the stuff that's going to in the city.
So for me, I found it was greed that was arising, and that was...
You wanted to bring Zion Canyon home?
I certainly didn't want to miss any angle and so forth. So, and there was a certain sense of agitation that came from that. So, how would you suggest a shift of perspective in that situation?
Look for a place where it's good to meditate. You find this in some surroundings where it's quiet and there's a sense of spaciousness. I personally don't like being enclosed in places when I'm meditating. When was in Thailand, I lived in a temple that was on a mountaintop. Metta is on top of a mountain. And so I go to the southwest, I try to find places where there's a good vista, and there's a sense of spaciousness. And you can meditate and open your eyes every now and then. Well, it's really nice out there, and then you close your eyes and you continue to meditate. And Mahakassapa, who's, he was one of the stricter, if not the strictest monk that the Buddha had among his followers. One of the poems describing the beauties of nature is attributed to him. And it's among the earliest wilderness poetry that's still recorded. Appreciating the wilderness as opposed to, say, a farming scene or a nice kind of domesticated rural scene. He's talking about wilderness and saying the beauties of the nature, and also once you get there and you get your mind really quiet, then there's no sensual pleasure that can compare. So there's a skillful use of it as a background for training the mind.
So that lends itself towards, because this scenery, as you're aware, is quite. There's nothing really subtle about it. It's astoundingly amazing. So, is there a potential for being in that without grasping at it and just?
I'm just saying, here I am. What's the best thing to do with this setting?
Let the mind settle.
I was just curious. I'm in my studies and listening to teachers. There's a phrase that's been coming up lately, and I guess it's actually thoughts arrive uninvited. Thoughts come uninvited, and then I thought, but the Buddha speaks of a causal chain in respect to everything. So is that helpful to think that way?
Okay, it's there are basically two kinds of thoughts that come in. There's thoughts that come in from your past actions, which those would be the uninvited thoughts.
Yeah.
I mean, you were creating the causes a while back, without thinking that this thought is actually going to come back and haunt me when I'm sitting down to meditate.
Okay, so this is like, yeah.
There's a causal chain, but they don't necessarily come when you want them.
Right.
And then there are other thoughts where you say, I'd really like to think about this. And then you pretend to yourself, I didn't say that. But you've already set the causal thing in motion.
Yeah.
And then when it comes back, so, oh. So some are invited, but you forgot that you made the invitation.
I was also looking at this part, end of the passage, which says, inwardly sensitive to the pleasure. He is inwardly sensitive to the pleasure of being blameless. So it's amazing. So it seems like this is not
it's not deprivation.
pure dry dispassion. You are going to have to. You are getting a step to stabilize yourself on something.
And if you don't have some pleasure to compensate from the pleasures that you're looking for through the senses, it's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
This is why in another passage he talks about how you really have to center your mindfulness in the body, create a sense of well-being there, and then it's a lot easier to kind of have control over the senses.
Interesting.
Do you think the barometer is for sort of judging between those two different types of thoughts in terms of ones that arise from past action and one that arises sort of volitionally? How would it be sort of the emotional tone that accompanies it?
And not so much the emotional tone is that, are you just kind of grabbing on it right now and running with it? And if you find that you are, it's okay, I'm not responsible for this right now. Yes?
So following up on Matthew's questions, one of my responses to being out in the wilderness was, I think, a sort of wholesome sense of my own significance, if you will, and kind of feeling the loss of that, because back here in this environment.
You think you're significant in Portland?
The sense of me seems stronger. It seems like that environment sort of supported more. I'm just.
This is why the Buddha recommends people go out into the wilderness.
Is it useful to bring memories up to evoke that sensibility.
When you sit down and close your eyes, you say, I could be anywhere now that my eyes are closed. Where, suppose I went back out on the edge of the Grand Canyon.
So it sounds like it would be useful.
Yeah. Yes.
I want to kind of tag on to Matthew also, and it reminds around setting up a second home so that we can be closer to our children. And I've had a lot of, I've been in a lot of sensuality, making decisions around colors and furniture and all that kind of stuff, and then noticing how easy it is to attach my worth to, have personality arise with all that. So, and in there it talks about being blameless, and what would there be any advice or recommendation around practicing with this process of setting up a home, which I want to be useful for us to hold family events, and I want it to be pleasant, and not getting lost and creating even more of this round of that being.
One of the questions you might ask
part of
yourself
who I
is,
am.
in the choices you're making, which ones are going to be more expensive, which ones are going to require more stuff, which ones are going to require less.
So move towards the less.
Move towards the less. And keep it simple. Okay, passage 1.3. Here's a series of analogies the Buddha has for sensuality. Suppose a dog overcome with weakness and hunger were to come across a slaughterhouse, and there a dexterous butcher or butcher's apprentice were to fling him a chain of bones, thoroughly scraped without any flesh, smeared with blood. What do you think? Would the dog, gnawing on that chain of bones, thoroughly scraped without any flesh, smeared with blood, appease its weakness and hunger? No, Lord, why is that? Because the chain of bones is thoroughly scraped without any flesh and smeared with blood. Okay. Can you think of some sensual pleasures you've had that are like chewing on a chain of bones? And John Lee has a great analogy for this. He says, what does the dog taste? It tastes its own saliva. I can choose to thinking about how great that would be if I got this, how great it would be if I got that. Because that's what sensuality is. It's planning for a particular pleasure. It's not so much the pleasures themselves that are the problem, it's this constant obsession with, I want this pleasure, I want that pleasure. And they say, well, let's twist it a little bit, and let's twist it a little bit, and enjoy that pleasure as well. But then when you get out of it, there's actually nothing. All you get is your own saliva. So then here's the refrain that he gives with every one of them. In the same way, the disciple of noble ones considers this point. The blessed one is comparing sensuality to a chain of bones of much stress with much despair and greater drawbacks. Seeing this with right discernment as it has come to be, then avoiding the equanimity coming from multiplicity, dependent on multiplicity, he develops equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness, where the sustenance clinging for the baits of the world ceases without trace. Now, a couple terms here have to be explained. Singleness coming from multiplicity means making up your mind you're going to be equanimous in the face of sight, sound, smell, taste, tactile sensations, and ideas. Singleness dependent on, equanimity dependent on singleness is the singleness that comes from the mind in strong states of concentration. So basically, in order to overcome your desire for pleasures, you have to develop a state of mind in which the singleness comes from the fact that you've got the mind well focused. And equanimity comes from that. You're not just telling yourself, I'm going to be equanimous in the face of this. You've got a source of solidity inside that allows you to be equanimous and have a sense of nourishment at the same time. So again, it's not a question of depriving yourself, it's finding a higher level of pleasure, a higher level of well-being. Okay, here's another aspect of sensuality. Suppose a vulture, a kite, or a hawk seizing a lump of flesh were to take off, and other vultures, kites, or hawks following right after it were to tear at it with their beaks and pull at it with their claws. What do you think? If that vulture, kite, or hawk were not to quickly drop that lump of flesh, would it meet with death from that cause, or with death-like pain? Yes. So that's another aspect of sensuality. You get something good, and other people want it. And they will do anything they can to take it from you. Whereas the well-being that comes from jhana, they can't even see it, much less try to take it from you. Next one. Suppose a man were to come against the wind carrying a burning grass torch. What do you think? If you were not to quickly drop that grass torch, would he burn his hand or his arm or some other part of his body? So to meet with death from that cause or death-like pain. In other words, you can harm yourself by doing unskillful things under the power of sensual thoughts. You see all around us, I mean, the horrible things that people do just because they want something. And they'll do many unskillful things, lying, stealing, cheating in order to get it. Now suppose there were a pit of glowing embers deeper than a man's height, full of embers that were neither flaming nor smoking, and a man would come along, loving life, hating death, loving pleasure, abhorring pain. And two strong men, grabbing him by their arms, were to grab him to the pit of embers. What do you think? Wouldn't that man twist his body this way and that? Yes? So, he says, learn how to see sensuality as a pit of burning embers. It's something you don't want to get dragged down into. The next analogy is, suppose a man when dreaming were to see delightful forests, delightful forests, delightful stretches of land, and delightful lakes, and on awakening would see nothing. That's another aspect of sensuality. You can see all these beautiful things, you can visualize all these beautiful things, but then when you stop, there's nothing. Or you can gain these pleasures, and then when they're gone, there's nothing. Which I used to like to make the point, those sensual pleasures you had last week, where are they now? And again, if you did something unskillful in order to gain those sensual pleasures, that's what you've got left, which is nothing that you want. Now suppose a man having borrowed some goods, a manly carriage, fine jewels, and ear ornaments. That tells you a lot about India in those times, doesn't it? Well, the ear ornaments, of course, we have those now again. Right? Ear ornaments.
Yes.
Big plugs.
Plugs, yeah. Were to go into the market, preceded and surrounded by his borrowed goods, and people seeing him would say, how wealthy this man is, for this is how the wealthy enjoy their possessions. But the actual owners, wherever they might see him, would strip him there and then of what is theirs. What do you think? Would the man justifiably be upset? No. Why is that? Because then they're taking what's theirs. In the same way, if your sensual pleasure depends on a particular person or particular people, they could take it away at any time. And you wouldn't have any grounds for complaining. Now suppose that not far from the village or town there was a dense forest grove, and there in the grove was a tree with delicious fruit, abundant fruit, but with no fruit falling on the ground. Man would come along desiring fruit, looking for fruit, searching for fruit. Plunging into the forest grove, he would see the tree, and the thought would occur to him, this is a tree with delicious fruit. You understand what he's thinking. Why don't I climb the tree, eat what I like, and fill my clothes with the fruit? So but I do know that there's no fruit falling to the ground, but I do know how to climb a tree. So he climbs the tree and eats what I like and fill my clothes with fruit. Then a second man would come along desiring fruit, looking for fruit, searching for fruit, and carrying a sharp axe. Plunging in the forest grove, he would see the tree, and the thought would occur to him, this is a tree with delicious fruit, abundant fruit, and there is no fruit falling to the ground, and I don't know how to climb a tree. Why don't I chop down this tree at the root, eat what I like, and fill my clothes with the fruit? So he would chop the tree at the root. What do you think? If the first man who climbed the tree didn't quickly come down, wouldn't the falling tree crush his hand or foot or some other part of his body? So he would meet with death from that cause, or with death-like pain. Again, this is a symbol for the fact that you work hard to get something, and then someone else could come along and just take it from you. If that's where your life is devoted to sensual pleasures, you're heading for a fall. So, the points that are being made by this one is that really there's not much nourishment in sensual pleasure or sensual thinking. And it sets you up for a situation where people want to take away what you've got. And it doesn't leave you with anything afterwards. And in the course of gaining that sensual pleasure, you might do some very unskillful things. So those are some of the drawbacks of sensual pleasures that the Buddha has you contemplate using these analogies. Have any questions about any of those? Yeah.
Why is it called equanimity based on multiplicity? Why isn't it called disturbance based on multiplicity?
Okay, but because you can make your mind equanimous in the face of things, just by force of will. But doesn't last long. So basically saying, instead of just trying to drop the sensuality and be equanimous by telling yourself to be equanimous, you've got to give yourself something else to support that equanimity. There's another passage where the Buddha says, if you can't find the well-being that comes from jhana, or a deeper well-being, then no matter how much you understand the drawbacks of sensuality, you're still going to go back. So you can tell yourself, okay, it doesn't matter to me, I don't care, but part of your mind is going to just go leaping back as soon as your mindfulness lapses. So you need something more solid to base your well-being on.
So equanimity based on singleness is somewhat like jhana?
Like the
and
jhanas, yeah.
jhana.
Yes.
So I keep getting in trouble with things like fixing up my house to improve it, like painting the kitchen cabinets so they don't look so crummy, or losing weight because I've gained 10 pounds recently. I get in a lot of trouble with that around, am I clinging to something? And would the ideal be to just go shave my head and become a nun and
No.
forget about all of it? Or what?
Okay, well, the what is, ask yourself, okay, will I be healthier if I lose 10 pounds?
Absolutely.
Okay, then go for it. Am I embarrassed by the kitchen?
Yes.
Okay. How embarrassed am I about the kitchen?
Well, that's a question, I don't know. I don't know how much of it is just I want to improve my image of myself that people see when they come in versus it's totally functional, it's just
And this is one of the reasons why in France they don't let people into their kitchens.
I mean, how do you know when it's the right thing to do in normal middle-class life?
Normal middle class life. I'll say I want that's something better than normal middle class life. And if my friends look down on me because my kitchen cabinets look a little dingy, maybe I got the wrong friends. You want friends who can see into your heart and see what a wonderful person you are, and then they come over.
Yeah, true.
And then they're not going to care about the kitchen cabinets.
They don't, actually.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
care.
Yes.
My question is, I find myself more I practice Buddhism and detach a lot of things that I used to like, I don't like anymore.
Mhm.
I used like big house, I don't care anymore.
Mhm.
So my friend, probably people outside look at me like, oh, she's depressed.
Mhm.
And then sometimes I'm asking myself, am I depressed? Why are things I don't like anymore. I'd rather just sit down and meditate. So that's from time to time. My mom, the more you do meditation, the more you don't take care of yourself anymore. You used to, like put makeup, things like that. I'm like, I don't care anymore. So I don't know the difference. Am I really depressed?
Depression is when you don't see anything worth doing at all. You say, but meditation is there's still pleasure in the meditation. Okay, if there's something that you find that's inspiring, something that you find is worthwhile doing, that's not depression.
But I let go so many things I used to do.
Yeah, well, it's like little children growing up. Certain the toys and games that you played with when you were a little kid. Or in my own case, when I was a little kid, I can't believe it, I used to like Hostess cupcakes and Twinkies.
You don't like them anymore?
No. I mean, I can smell the sugar from several feet away. And so as long as you find that there's an activity that you find worthwhile, that's not depression. Depression is when you say, nothing's really worth doing anything at all. That would be a sign that that's something seriously is wrong. And I think personally that if you're not concerned about a good house and you're not concerned about makeup, you really are looking after yourself. There's I don't know how appropriate this story is right now, but there's a collection of Ajahn Chah stories that have not been published. And they're still being collected in Thai, and one of the reasons is that someone worked pretty hard to take. But one of my favorites is this. Ajahn Chah was in England, and this woman came and asked him, "Do arhats still have sex?" And he said, "No." She said, "Well, why not?" He said, "When you were a child, did you play in the dirt? Did you play with your excrement? Did you eat your own boogers?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I guess it. Do you do that now?" "Oh no." It's the same thing. You can see why this hasn't been printed.
Ajahn
Gil Fronsdale had a 20-year anniversary a long time ago of Ajahn. I can't remember actually what the 20-year was. Ajahn Chah's death, I
It was the
think
90s, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and they were the guest monks started sharing stories about Ajahn Chah, and they were getting a little raunchier and a little raunchier. And Ajahn Sumedho just starts giggling. He goes, "Oh, I've got one, I've got one." And he sits there and he goes, no, I just can't share that one.
There was another one that was in the collection, and it involved Ajahn Sumedho when they went to England. There was one night where people would come and were asking questions of Ajahn Chah, quite late into the night. And he had the same experience with Ajahn Chah that I had with Ajahn Sawat, which is when he gets talking, he just gets talking. You know, he'll have a Dharma lesson that lasts 20 minutes before he stops for translation. And so poor Ajahn Sumedho was there translating as best he could. It was getting past midnight, and there was another one of these 10, 15-minute talks from Ajahn Chah in response to a question. And at the end of the piece, Ajahn Sumedho said, "Well, to boil that down, basically, don't do anything evil and do what's good." And Ajahn Chah turns and says, "You're getting tired, aren't you?" Okay, Any other questions on sensuality? Yes.
I don't know if you were going to look at the next one that has to do with going out of your range.
Yes.
But I was just interested, just offhand, is there any significance to where it says, gosh, where am I? Where it says that you've gone out of your range, but you're in the range of other people, and he's talking to monks at that point. Is there sensual pleasures? Is he suggesting that it's within the proper range of others? It's the territory of others, I guess. Yeah.
Well, who's the other here? It's Mara.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Okay. Basically, the image here is of the monkeys. Okay. Okay.
But it's plural, he says, and is the territory of others.
Mm-hmm.
Is that supposed to be of maybe possessive, of like being Maras?
Yeah, big Maras. Mm-hmm. And also people who are enjoying the sensual pleasures. That's their territory. It's no territory for a monk.
Right.
It's dangerous for everybody. If you're going to be meditating, you have to watch out for it. So here, the basic image is of the monkey who's been caught. There are level stretches of land delightful where both monkeys and human beings wander. This is toward the beginning of 1.4. In such spots, hunters set a tar trap in the monkey's tracks in order to catch the monkeys. Those monkeys who are not foolish or careless by nature, when they see the tar trap, will keep their distance. I love this. But any monkey who is foolish and careless by nature comes up to the trap and grabs it with his paw, which then gets stuck there. Thinking, "I'll free my paw," he grabs it with his other paw. That too gets stuck. Thinking, "I'll free both of my paws," he grabs it with his foot. That too gets stuck. Thinking, "I'll free both of my paws and my foot," he grabs it with his other foot. That too gets stuck. Thinking, "I'll free both of my paws and my feet as well," he grabs it with his mouth. That too gets stuck. So the monkey, snared in 5 ways, lies there. 5 ways, of course, stand for the 5 senses. Lies there whimpering, having fallen on misfortune, fallen on ruin, prey to whatever the hunter wants to do with him. Then the hunter, without releasing the monkey, skewers him right there, picks him up and goes off as he likes. Now that's in one of those images you remember for a long time. This is what happens to anyone who wanders into what is not his proper range and is the territory of others. And so for a meditator, what is the proper range? Your proper range is the foundations of mindfulness. The territory of others is these 5 strings of sensuality. The word string here is the same word they use as a string for a guitar. That kind of string. It gets plucked and you resonate. forms cognizable by the eye, agreeable, pleasing, charming, endearing, fostering, desire, enticing. Same with sounds, aromas, flavors, tactile sensations. Okay, that's the territory of others. Okay, your own proper territory is the 4 establishings of mindfulness. Now, these establishments of mindfulness are not just things, they're activities. This is an activity you engage in. This is a case where we remain focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. Okay, that's one establishing of mindfulness, that whole clause. Let's go over that. Okay, you remain focused on the body. Keep that as your frame of reference. Keep whatever's happening, how does this relate to my body right now? That's your grounding. And you try to stay there as steadily as possible. Ardent, in other words, you're trying to put some energy into this, do it well. Alert, it means you notice what you're doing and the results of what you're doing. Mindful means that you're able to keep in mind what you should be doing. All these 3 qualities have to go together. Then putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world, any of this we talked about earlier about sensual restraint, sensory restraint. If you notice that greed and distress are arising, you learn how to put them aside. This is why mindfulness practice builds on sense restraint. And as I mentioned last night when John Lee was talking about this, most of the books you read about the establishments of mindfulness will focus on body, feelings, mind, mental qualities. And John Lee's book focuses on the ardent, alert, and mindful. And he carries that through all the different levels of the practice and shows what those words mean. Because these are the qualities you have to bring to the practice. It's also important to notice that when there's a lot of misunderstanding about mindfulness, thinking that it's okay just seeing whatever comes up and being with whatever comes up and then letting it go when it passes. That comes from a misreading of the Satipatthana Sutta. There's a very long sutta which discusses this topic. And everybody assumes that this is kind of a complete discussion of the topic. But when you look at how the Buddha sets up that particular sutta, he starts with this formula for the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And then he only discusses one part of it. What does it mean to remain focused on the body in and of itself? What does it mean to be focused on the feelings in and of themselves? And so on down the line. And then the question of what it means to be ardent, alert, mindful, what it means to put aside greed and distress with reference to the world, he doesn't touch. So that even that very long sutta just deals with a small slice of the topic. And a lot of people miss that point, because in that sutta he doesn't tell you what you do ardently. And so they assume that you don't do anything ardently, or you're just there with whatever arises and passes away. But if you look in the rest of the canon, he has very specific instructions for when this type of feeling arises or that type of mental state arises, what you do with it. So this is basically keeping this framework in mind. Then you can either base it on being with the body, feelings of pleasure, pain, neither pleasure nor pain. Mind, okay, what's the state of your mind? Or mental qualities, individual qualities of mind that have to be developed or let go. These are 4 different frameworks that you can use in order to apply mindfulness as you go through the plan.
What is the difference between mind and mental quality?
The best I can see is using that, the analogy of the committee of the mind, is that mind refers to the whole committee has decided we're going to go out for ice cream.